So I'm going to be answering most of your questions around interviews, cracking them, your body language, connecting with the recruiter, answering tricky and difficult questions, your strengths, weaknesses, why you should be hired, your introduction, and all of that. And if you're looking for more, if you're looking at tailoring them, if you're looking at customizing responses, getting feedback, if you're looking at handling the anxiety of the interviews, then you'd have to head over to my course, which is offered in the link below, okay, or on my website. Now, for those of you who are looking for only certain topics, I've listed it down for you, and you can scroll down and look at those particular timestamps and just focus on that. But because this content is a little more advanced, I would recommend that you watch all of it. The style. Imagine you're speaking to someone you highly respect and admire, someone who's more senior, like a mentor or a professor, and you've spoken to them a couple of times. Now, this is the third time you're going to be talking to them. So you're meeting them with a smile and enthusiasm. You are candid. You are asking questions. You're correcting yourself. You're accepting your mistake. You're curious, and you're listening to them intently. And it's important to also have a little smile while the person is asking you a question, or you're listening to them. Okay, so that's as far as your style is concerned. Practice talking to someone like that. Now, you also want to use your body, especially if you get nervous. You want to increase your volume if you get nervous. You want to use your gestures if you get nervous, or even otherwise. And it's always good to use your gestures and talk with your body as well. Okay, you can, if there's a question coming to you, you're not sure of, you can go back in your chair, take a moment to think, and then begin answering. You don't have to just go one after the other. Okay, just take a couple of seconds, pause, think, and then respond. You want to also be able to listen to them with a smile on your face. Okay, while you're listening, have a smile on your face while you're listening to the question. Okay, not always, not throughout, not a creepy smile, but in between, focus on the smile. Don't occupy their table with stuff. Don't keep your stuff on the lap, because it restricts your movement. Keep your bag on the side, on the table, whatever. Because if you keep your stuff on your lap, you will be restricted. Don't keep your cell phone out and in a visible spot. Keep it in your bag or keep it in your pocket. Let it retain the pocket. So those kind of things, because you want to use your body as well. In terms of the anxiety, you're going to have to do the same processes I mentioned. I mentioned a lot of stuff on physiological symptoms inside, how to manage the nervousness, how to handle the negative thinking about whether you will be able to answer the question or not. The details you would have to find. If this is something that's bothering you a lot, then one of the things you can do is enroll for the courses that I have on the fear of speaking in front of people. Okay. And the other thing I can say is just focus on answering the questions that you know, and make sure that you say "I don't know" to the questions that you don't know. Okay, because the tendency is to just bullshit, and it doesn't really work. Just be confident and clear and say, you know what, I'm not really sure I know the answer to that. When you're meeting people in an environment, there is usually going to be a little bit of a chit chat before the interview commences. Now, I've spoken about that in another module. I've spoken about the question, how are things? How's it going? What have you been up to? Those kind of things. You don't want to mention the cliched stuff like, I was trying to find a spot in terms of parking, or the weather, and the very immediate news that everyone is raving about. Do not talk about those things. I know there'll be recruiters talking to you. The first thing they'll say typically is, were you able to manage finding us? Or how did you get a spot to park, or whatever, all those things, right? Don't worry about all that. That's cliched stuff. Don't talk about that. Talk about something which is more sudden in terms of work. So, if you're currently employed and you're going for a new job, then be like, well, I'm just wrapping up things in my current organization. We're working on this project. And then you can mention a couple of lines, not too long. Okay. Or you can say something fun that, I've just recently moved over here. I'm just trying to get a hang of the whole thing. You can say something like that, or you can say something, some new interesting place you visited. Or, I never knew that you guys are located here. One of my favorite restaurants is down the corner. So you can just chit chat about something that you actually genuinely want to. Okay. Don't give unnecessary compliments, flattery, and that kind of stuff. And it's not something you feel. So, I love your office and that kind of stuff. Don't say that. If you do say that, qualify that statement. So I love your office In my office, everything is just very closed. This is a lot more open, so I like it, right? Or you can be like, how many people work out of this office? It seems pretty busy right now, or something like that, something you're curious about, okay? Or you can keep quiet. If you're the person who's a little more quiet, you can keep it to the point. Be like, hey, nothing, how you doing? And then flip the question back on them and then just not speak too much. Okay, you could do that as well. In the interview room, you can get right down to business if you want. Be like, oh, so I was actually just thinking that I should probably look at XYZ area of work, and it just so happened that I saw your description online, and just get into it directly, okay? So the style and then the introduction. So if they're asking you about an introduction, which is tell us about yourself, the entire answer, depending on if you're very young, which means you haven't worked for many years at all, then your answer can be about 10 lines. If you worked a lot, if you're very senior, then the answer can be about a minute long, but not more than a minute, okay? You want to talk about mostly the last 5 years of your life. You want to talk about a couple of key achievements. So one key achievement in your last job, if there is an obvious question, something like, why are you leaving your current job? Then you're going to mention that at the end. The reason why I'm leaving my job is X. I'm looking for something like this, whatever that is. So your introduction, again, I've put it out for you and I've listed examples for you. So I'm not going to get too much into detail. It's a very tricky response that needs to be really customized and worked on several times. It's not easy for me to tell you what to do with an introduction. The idea is I can give you a few tips. You want to talk about mainly the last 5 years. Okay, if you're a person who's less than 25, you can talk about primarily where you grew up. You can talk about your biggest, your education qualifications. You can talk about the number of years of experience, you can talk about the experience you have in which field and what your achievement was. That's it. Okay, if you're, let's say, beyond 35, or if you're between 35 to 40, then talk about primarily where you grew up, talk about your biggest academic achievement or qualification, and talk about the number of years of experience in which field, whether it's relevant to the job you're applying for. Mention that. So I've got 5 years of experience in this area, and in my most recent job, I was able to do this. You can mention 2 achievements. So one in the job before the one that you recently had, and the one that you recently had. So both biggest achievements in that with metrics and data. If you're much older than that, or if you've got an extensive experience which matches the profile, then you can go ahead and give a longer response, okay? But not more than a minute long, okay? So that's in terms of your introduction. Again, this is something we have to work on a lot. Your strengths. Your strengths have to typically match the job that you're applying for. If you're applying for a job that requires relevant experience, and if you don't have relevant experience, then you have to look at the most relevant thing you've done related to the job. So for example, if your experience requires, something to do with managing teams, right? But you haven't done that, but you've managed working in teams and you've managed to assist other teams, then you talk about that, right? So whatever is the closest to the job's expectations, you talk about that. Otherwise, you just talk about your core experience and not worry about the relevant experience. The strength would be the things that you displayed while working. So working in that job would be a strength if it's the same thing that they require. So if they require X number of years in this particular field and you have some time spent in that particular field, then that would be a strength. You can just say that I've worked for 1 year in this area already. That's my strength, right? Otherwise, you talk about the skills that are required in that role, because they're not looking for that exact job that you've done. You've done something related to that. Now, in that case, you can say the first strength would be, I'm excellent at managing people and working with people. I've done that all throughout my life. Now, you have to give a proof as to why you believe that. You can't just say, I'm great. You've got to talk about why you are that. So you'd be like, so from my childhood, I've been managing teams. I've been a leader from the start. I've been given position of responsibility, not so much in my workplace, but otherwise. And even when it comes to taking initiative and showing leadership skills, I'm pretty high on that, according to my previous employers. Now, this fulfills the requirement of you possibly managing teams later on. Okay, so that's one of the strengths you would use. The second strength you could use is something to do with your knowledge, your interest, your passion. So for example, you don't have the experience in financial analysis, but you know what, I'm really passionate about, so the point would be that I'm very passionate about this field I've been investing my own money for the last 2 years. I've learned this. I'm also pursuing CFA. So you talk about the knowledge and the interest and the passion. Okay. The third thing you can mention is a couple of personal qualities that you possess which are relevant to the requirements of the job. So if they want someone who speaks well, for example, or if they want someone who presents well, if that's the core skill that will be needed. You talk about how you're really good at presenting your ideas, you're very good with communications. So your previous job required you to do X, Y, Z, which you did really well. And a large part of it was communicating with senior people, and you were excellent at it, right? So you would mention that part as well. You can mention a few more details if the job is more senior and it requires you and you have the skills, then you can mention 2, 3 if you want. Typically 3 is okay, it's enough, right? Now this answer actually corresponds very closely to why you should be hired. If you've got all the right sets, then it's pretty much very, very similar, but if not, then it'll be slightly different. Now, if you don't have experience you're saying the question is, why should you be hired? Then of course you can't talk about the experience, but you're going to talk about the skills, like I said, which are relevant to that experience that is needed. So why should you be hired? Let's say if you're a fresh graduate and you're going for a marketing job, you've not had a marketing experience. Why should you be hired? Well, what are the skills in marketing? Creativity, presenting ideas in a way, strategy, etc. So you can be like, well, I've been studying this subject for the last whatever years. I've handled projects where I had to market my idea here, here, and here, and I've done that exceptionally well. Second, I'm also excellent at creativity. I've got skills with Canva, etc., and I'm very good with Photoshop as well. Third, I'm also excellent with people. I am able to lead a team of people as well. I was also the sports captain in my college, and managing people comes naturally to me, something like that, right? So again, 1, 2, 3, you've got 3 points that you mentioned. If you've got a lot more experience, then you would talk about the first thing being your experience. So, well, I've got several years of experience in this area. In my last job, I was able to increase sales by 20% within a span of 6 months. Second, I led a team, and you can quantify that number as well. Second, I led a team of 25 people where I got them to be able to do 5 projects before time, and every single project was appreciated immensely by the staff. Okay. Third, I'm exceptional at X, Y, and Z skills. Maybe those are technical skills you're talking about. And you can mention a couple of your personal traits. You can say that I'm typically able to exceed expectations because I'm highly motivated and I love this area. So something like that as well works. Okay. So your strengths are a shorter version, a less quantified version of your why should we hire you. It's okay if some of the things are repeated because they need to be. So why you should be hired, those answers need to be repeated at least twice in the interview anyway. You need to harp on that point as to why you're fit. Okay, so some of it will come in your introduction, maybe an achievement, let's say it might come in your introduction, it might come again in a more lengthy fashion in your strength or in your, why should we be hiring you? And a little part of it can come again in your strength. Okay, don't worry about repeating a few things, it's fine, right? The key things need to be repeated. Go through the list, it's given to you, see which one applies to you. Don't say the ones that are cliched, always give a reason why those are your strengths. Substantiate your answers, give proof, give evidence. Okay, so you are, the typical ones. Try to stay away from the things like, you're a hard worker and a fast learner. I mean, every single person that I practically interviewed has said that. Okay, so ignore those things. Everyone is supposed to be a hard worker and a fast learner. If you really want to mention it, then say it in an emphatic manner by giving proof. So I'm a quick learner. The last company I worked at, there was a new software that was introduced. I learned it within 5 days, which was 20 days sooner than anyone else. And I was able to get blah, blah, blah. So you get the point. You make it fantastic. Okay. If there's anything which is a requirement, then that's not a strength, right? So if you're required to, you're going for a communications officer, you don't really want to say I communicate well. Right? You can say something, again, you can say it emphatically by saying, communication has been my forte. It's something that I've excelled at from childhood, from blah, blah. And then you can go on and talk a lot about it, right? So if you're really giving a lot of emphasis on it, then it's okay. But if you're just saying, I'm good at communications, well, that's what the job requires. So that's not really a strength as such. You don't stand out, okay? In terms of weaknesses, you don't want to mention a couple of things which are taboo. One of them is teamwork. not wanting to work in a team as a taboo. You don't want to mention that as much as you would love to. You don't want to bitch about past recruiters or anyone else. You don't want to complain about people at all. You don't want to talk about being it's cliche things like, I'm not good at managing work-life balance and crap like that, right? Those are all cliche things. There's a list of weaknesses that I've put out. You can actually go through it. You can see which ones apply to you and then figure out if you can use it. You can use any weakness as long as it doesn't compete with your ability to do the job well. So for example, if your job requires you to speak effectively in front of people and make presentations, you can't say that, I suck at doing that. Okay. So that's something you have to remember. Otherwise, it's all fine. There's a bunch of weaknesses I put out for you to just have a look at. Things like I'm not able to delegate well. Sometimes I end up doing extra work because of that. I haven't had experience leading teams, but I think I'll be okay with it. You can mention something like that. You can say I'm not, my English is not that great. I'm working on it. I mean, it's obviously going to be something that people will be able to tell if that's the case. So it's okay. I'm not very good with a particular software, you can say, but I'm learning and I should be good in about a month if that's required. Now, typically, you don't have to be defensive. You don't have to give an explanation or reason as to why this weakness is not going to persist. It's okay. If this weakness is there, you're aware of it, you haven't done much about it, it's fine. Now, they might ask you, what are you doing about it? And it's okay to say, well, I've become aware of it and I haven't yet planned on what to do yet. It's fine. Otherwise, if you have already began working on it, it's okay, you can say that. But without them asking you, it's okay. You don't have to mention it. This is my weakness, but this is what I'm doing to avoid it. And you should also not be saying, well, my weakness is that I'm not good at delegating. And at the same time, you're saying your strength is you're a great leader. Those things are contradictory. So don't say those things, right? Look at the list and see which one applies to you. Don't pick anything which is contradictory to the job you're going to be doing. And don't say a couple of those things, like I said, and the rest you should be fine. Be ready with 2 or 3 weaknesses. If they ask you for the weakness, say one. And if they ask you to talk about more, then mention others. Do not say, I have no weaknesses or I don't know what my weaknesses are. That's never a great answer. Okay. You can also not bullshit and take the recruiter as a fool. So if the job does not require you to work with numbers, you cannot say, oh, I hate working with numbers, because you're just evading the question. Okay. That's not even connected. It's like saying, I hate Santa Claus. Right? That's not even connected. It's not relevant. So talk about something relevant at the same time, not something that's directly required in the job. Okay. So for example, I'm a little shy at first, but then I open up and I'm okay then. That's still okay for a job that requires you to interact with people a lot. That's fine. There are these HR questions, behavioral questions, competency-based questions, which are on the kinds of, tell us about a time where you showed leadership. Is there a time where you demonstrated problem-solving skills? Talk to us about a time where you exceeded expectations, and these kind of questions. Any question like that, where they're asking a proof, or if they're saying, how do you know you will be good at this? If you haven't done this role, how do you know you'll be good? So those kind of questions require you to give them a situation where you've demonstrated these things. So the technique I would recommend is STAR. It's an old technique. It's on Google. I'm showing it to you. Situation, task, action, result. Okay, tell us about a time where you exceeded expectations. Now, this is my answer. Now we'll start with the situation. So there was this time when I was working as an HR consultant, and it was just post-recession. Things weren't picking up as fast, and I was also in charge of one of the branches, and one of the objectives I had was to make sure that the revenues are up. And because of this downturn, we had to figure out other ways. Now, so I mentioned the task here that we had to figure out ways, and I was responsible. Now the action. So what I did was I figured out which industry is profitable and that we can actually affiliate with. Now, for some reasons, my founders had never touched the mining industry. We were in other industries, oil and gas, we were in FMCG, we were in banking, but the mining sector was untouched. And that's something that I figured I should get into. And I started digging up on it. Without anyone's help, I started digging into it. I understood the mining sector. I started affiliating with now these are all actions, mind you, this is all action. I started getting into the whole trenches. I affiliated with a couple of companies. I ended up making one of the biggest I ended up getting one of the biggest, most high paid projects for that entire year within a span of 4 months. And that actually really helped our overall revenue growth. Okay. And obviously I was appreciated quite a bit for that. And there were several other occasions where I put in my time beyond the company hours for that particular role. And so I mentioned the entire situation in an STAR, situation, task, action, result format. Okay, that's what you're supposed to do. Now, the beauty of this is that this situation, if I've figured out one instance and I can form an answer for one situation, this situation can be a response to multiple questions. It can be a response to problem solving skills, managing, showing leadership. It can be about initiative. It can be about adding value to the employer. It can be about creativity. So all these things, if does anyone ask me any of these questions, tell us about your time, I will go to my number one response. So ideally come up with 2 or 3 situations which you'll be able to plug into any other question that you might get asked, and use the STAR technique. I would suggest 3 main questions. 1, exceeding expectations. 2, showing leadership. 3, handling conflict. Okay, these are the 3 common ones. Just prepare on that. Now, if you've got less experience, by the way, it doesn't have to be excessive or grand like the way I presented to you. It can be a normal one as well. It's okay. You're not comparing your answer with anyone else's, right? Whatever best you've done, right? So let's say if you gave suggestions on a particular project, but you didn't lead that project. You gave suggestions, you gave inputs, and that project was extremely successful. You can then take credit for that. You can say that, I was able to play an active role in the successful completion of project XYZ. Okay, so you can take credit for that project in a way. Similarly, now you can talk about, if you don't have the relevant work experience, you can talk about the way you are as a person. So you can talk about how you went above expectations by being a good person in the sense of helping others out on your own time. So I trained the new staff members even though I wasn't required to, or I used to, other than managing my entire college work, I also make sure that I help my mom in the house. Even something like that would be good. So if you're a hardworking person, you're managing all your household chores, you're helping out your mom, you're doing all your homework, you're traveling 2 hours in the train, whatever, all that stuff, you're managing everything. That shows your dedication, focus, whatever it is that you're talking about. You can say that it's leadership, knowing how to step up and take initiative. Okay, so that depends on how you're marketing yourself and how you're arguing. You can use personal examples, but it's ideal to use work examples and work achievements. Okay, number 1, try to use work achievements, work examples. 2nd, personal examples, personal qualities, family, friends, whatever. And 3rd could be your hobbies and something like that. Okay, a time when you showed leadership. Well, there was this time where I was working for XYZ company and I wasn't actually a manager. I didn't have a team to manage, and there was a project that was delayed and the client was fretting over it. It was a big $1 million project, and the company was getting a lot of slack for it. The main person had resigned, and because of that, there was a lot of delay. So now you're describing the situation. There was a big deal. Now, our task, the team's task, was to somehow fix the thing as best as we can, as best as we could. And I was the one who actually took up the ownership. I took up the initiative. I went to my boss. I spoke about this, and I said, just allow me XYZ resource. And without caring about getting everyone on board, I asked whoever was interested. I got 2 other people along with me, and we actually spent few hours extra every single day for the next 7 days, and we finished a major chunk of that project in time. And I think I was, because of all that work, our customers who were initially extremely unhappy were still became friends with us, and they understood the issue, and we salvaged it to the best of our abilities. And I was actually highly appreciated for that. Okay, now I just made this up. Of course, you'll have time to prepare a better one, and it's okay. Even if you assisted someone in a project, it's fine if you want to take credit for that. You can say that I've extensively worked on several projects, and a lot of those projects became successful, and they got completed in 20% less time than it was intended. Okay, so try to take credit for other stuff. If you've assisted your manager, let's say, in making a presentation, take credit for that. Say that I was, a lot of the presentations I worked on got XYZ success. Okay, so look at the outcome of your job and talk about your contribution to that outcome. Okay, don't just talk about you working on the presentation. Talk about the end result of that presentation. The changes that were made in the company policy was because you assisted in it, rather than you assisting only in the presentation. You get my point? Of course, you're going to have to sit down and think about it, and we're going to have to work on it a little more, and that's what the course is for. There's something called FERMI questions, right? These are questions which are very tricky. So I'll give you an example. How many hair does a human scalp have? This is the typical one. Now, there is no set. Now, the answer, of course, is if you Google it, it's about 100 to 150,000. But let's assume you don't have an answer. All they want to do is they want to know how you calculate, how you approach problems, how you handle questions in real time where you don't know the answer. What kind of presence of mind do you have? How do you handle stress? These are the questions they're really trying to understand. They're not caring about your actual answer. Okay, whether you say 100,000 or whether you say million, it doesn't matter. Now, the way to analyze the problem is what matters. So now, what are the ways is you talk out loud while you calculate. So you figure out some strategy. You can say, well, and you can't say something random. It has to make sense. So one of the ideas that I have is like say, okay, so let's start with this much. Okay, this much portion. If I were to look at how many hairs would be on this finger, probably about 2,000 multiplied by 5, that's about 10,000. Okay, now if I look at my entire, this portion, this is about my hand, that's 10 into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's about 50,000 over here. Now I can cover 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now if I do 50,000 multiplied by, that's about 250. I think I would say about, no, 250,000 sounds very less. Probably I would say 350,000. This is a perfect answer. You've calculated, you've ran through the entire process. It makes sense. It's okay. Now it doesn't matter if you're off, by a lot. It doesn't matter what the answer is. Okay, that's how you solve it. Another question: how many traffic lights are there in your city? Okay, completely off. You have no idea. Obviously, it depends on how you solve. Okay, so I think in my neighborhood, this is about a 200-meter area. I would take this as an average area in the city. It's got about it's about 10 traffic lights in this area. Now, if I look at a 2-kilometer radius, multiply 100 meters by 10, 20, that's about 200 traffic lights in a 2-kilometer radius. Now the city is, now again, you may not even know how big a city is. It's fine, right? So I'm guessing the city I'm living in is about 30 kilometers from border to border, one end to the other end. Now, if I were to say, now not all of it is as populated as this area. I would say about 2/3 is. So let's take 2/3, so 20 kilometers. Now 20 into 200, 4,000. Now 4,000 seems too small. Let's do 5. I think about 5,000. Again, perfect answer. No problem at all. You can use a paper and pen if you want to do the math. No big deal. Another question I want to give you is, how many people right now are using their cell phones? Okay. Now, I want to know, let's look at the population of the world. Now, I might be very off, but that's fine. But I happen to know the population of the world. The population of the world is about 7.5 billion. Let's look at the number of people who own cell phones. Probably about 4 billion. Or no, maybe half the world, more than half. Yeah, 4 billion, I would say. 2 billion poor. 5 billion, right? 5 billion people own cell phones. I would say at any time, let's look at one person at any time, they would be using 3 hours. I'd say in a day, 3 hours of cell phone use in a day. So 1/8, right? So 24, 1/8 of the time you're using your phone. And, but not everyone. A lot of people are just, I would say probably about 1/20th of the time. Okay, so 1/20th of 4 billion. Now you got to calculate that, and you would probably say about 40 million, sorry, 50 million, I would say. Yeah, that sounds about right. 15, no, it's too big. Okay, let me just do 30. 30 million people right now are looking at their phones. Now, you may be way off, whatever, it doesn't matter. You've given them the way you've calculated it, that's good enough. Okay, figure out some process to it, either from inside out or outside in, and give it to them. That's how you answer these questions. Let's say if they throw you off completely, they ask you a question you have no idea about. Take your time, think about it, give your best attempt if you want. And if you have no idea, then just say, I'm not sure. Okay. And if they're asking you, then you say, I know it's a tricky question. I'm just not sure how I would answer it. And then start talking about something else, right? You can actually present to them what they could ask you. So, this area I'm actually not really good at, but, I've been following a lot about this. And if you ask me about this, I would know. Okay. Now, if they ask you something that you're supposed to know, let's say, how many states are in your country, and you get that wrong. How many, what's the capital city of the state, and you don't know. It's a little embarrassing, and then you would have to admit that it's embarrassing. Be like, oh shit, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer, and it's a little embarrassing, but unfortunately I don't know. But I'm really good at this stuff, and if you ask me, and then you can try to push, if they're asking you too much of that same genre of questions, try to tell them that, this is not something that's working well for me, but I'm really good at this. If you don't mind, can we move to that? But make sure that you're asking them to pick a specific topic. Don't say, ask me anything about banking, right? Talk to them about a specific area within banking that you're good at. Do you have questions for us? If they ask you this, you don't have to necessarily forcefully ask them anything. If you don't have a question, it's fine. If there's something that you're curious about a job, let's say whether it's going to be in a particular city or whether it's going to entail a lot of travel, that's something you can ask them. You can talk about, if you're wondering what are the long-term objectives that they're looking at, you can ask them that. That's a good question to ask. If there's something you read in the news about the job or their company that interests you, you can ask them that. Don't start having a little chit-chat about their lives and how they got into that role and all that crap. Don't also comment on something which is supposed to be known by you, right? So what are the skills required for this job is not something. However, if they've been asking you about something which seems to you, which was unexpected, let's say they're asking about a technical skill and you're not sure why they're doing that, you can then ask them that, is this skill something that you're really particular on? Because that's not something that I know so well, but I'll be able to grasp, or something like that you can mention. If your interview does not go as planned, if you mess it up, let's say, before leaving the room, just ask politely, just say, that's, ma'am, sir, I'm sorry if the interview didn't go as planned, it didn't go well, but here's why you should hire me. I feel that and then you mention your 3 reasons. So before you get up, you make sure you tell them those reasons. If you haven't gotten a chance to say those reasons in the interview, make sure you don't leave the room before saying that answer out. Do you have any questions for us? No, I don't really have questions, but I really want to say why I think this position is the right fit for me, because 1, 2, 3, mention those points. Okay. If you get really nervous in the interview, your hands are shaky, etc., that kind of stuff, it's okay. You can tell them, I'm sorry, I get a little nervous in the interviews. I haven't had an interview in a while. Just allow me a few seconds, or just say that it didn't go well because of the nervousness. It's okay. People will understand. You can say this in order to take some more time to think and talk. Okay. You can also tell them that if the job requires you to be present in front of people and talking in front of people, just say, this is not something that typically happens in other situations. Okay. It's important for that as well. Hopefully you wouldn't be lying. Okay. All your responses, you need to sit down, you need to flesh them out, you need to work on them, you need to get feedback. You need to look at changing those responses depending on a kind of interview. You need to have an elevator pitch ready, 3-4 lines of why you should be hired. This is really important. If you're on the phone and you're applying for work, you don't want to say, hi, I'm looking for a job, right? You want to talk about, hi, I'm looking for a role in this area. I've recently graduated over here. I've got about 3 years of experience in this, right? You're going to give a 3-4 line good response, and then the person might be interested in you. The same thing with the email. 3 or 4 lines need to go in the email, not a long email. Don't worry about a cover letter and all that unless it's required. Just 3-4 lines talking about your highlights. And the subject of the email is also very important. Okay, application for the role of this, comma, 5 years of experience in blah, blah, whatever. Okay, mention a top achievement in those 3-4 lines in the email body. Mention a top achievement if you have on the call, if they're talking more to you. Otherwise, just mention those 3 lines that I mentioned earlier. Okay, now elevator pitch has to be ready. Your email has to be sent properly, formatted properly, etc. Which is why I recommend that you join the course, you spend some time revising your answers, get your answers checked, send it across, make sure everything is spot on, make sure it's tailored to you, why you should be hired. For anxiety, again, the questions are different, your concerns would be different. There's a lot of videos, there's a lot of exercises which will help you overcome that anxiety, which will help you flesh out your answers and get the feedback that you need. Okay, so good luck.